big time record producer, did it all, $1 million checks and all that. And then you went into something that's completely nuts. And you, right?
Don't even start. Yeah, totally. People would say, hey, could you give me a call on my internet number? I'd be like, no. It's called an email address.
Big time record producer. The difference is, what's your foundation?
How difficult it has been to lose Prince.
Good morning. This is Mark Holzapfel.
Right. This is the VCA section. Output. Yay!
Here I am.
Yes, I almost didn't believe it's gonna happen.
It's happened.
This is my man, Will Henshall. You are in LA at this moment, right?
Yes, Venice Beach.
Quick introduction for people who haven't heard of you before. They will definitely know some of the music you've written and produced.
I do two things. I'm a composer and a songwriter and a musician. And as you can see from the wall of stuff behind me.
Fantastic. Actually, a very good time to have these in the background, a podcast interview. I have to say that.
Yeah, I just have one wall in my studio with what I like to call the wall of shame behind me here with all of the stuff. Most of this is with the band London Beat.
Yes.
And Peter Stone. Hey, Peter, I haven't seen you for a long time. I'm sure there's going to be a few folk I know. Yeah, most of these are in the band, from the band London Beat, and I was the founder of that band. Started that in 1987, 30 years ago, believe it or not. And there was me and three singers, three African-American soul singers. And we were based out of London in the UK. And for the first couple of years, we didn't have much success at all. And then it was an overnight success 3 years later when we had started having hits. The one that most people will remember worldwide is I've Been Thinking About You.
Was it the first one?
And, well, in the States, it was the first one. But in Europe, we had a couple of big hits before that. The first one was a song called There's a Beat Going On, which was like an acid house tune.
Yes.
You may remember that.
Yeah,
that was in 89. That was a hit first in Holland and I think Germany too.
Yeah.
And then we had a very interesting deal in the band. We were signed to MCA Records in the USA and RCA Records in the rest of the world. Mm. And how did that come about? Well, we were managed to the Eurythmics management. Mm-hmm. Eurythmics management, we were involved. Dave Stewart's a friend of mine. We were part of the Eurythmics backing group, we being me and the three singers. And what we discovered through them is that at the time, RCA Records was very strong worldwide, but very, very ineffective in the USA. That changed later on. Yeah. So we had a brilliant manager. Her name is, she's still around. Her name is Sandra Turnbull. And she said, what we're going to do is we're going to sign London Beat for the whole of the world except America. Mm-hmm. So everywhere else, Canada, to everywhere else. And we're going to keep the USA free. So we did that. And then we had no company here in the States, which was crazy. It's half of the world's record sales are in America. And we started to have hits with our album in Canada, UK, got to number 2, did well, but we still hadn't signed to the USA. And I was getting nervous, but my manager, who I trusted, she said to me, hey, I think we should wait until you have the big number 1. Yes. And we think you've got one on this next album, which was our second album. So the first album was not released in America. The second album, which we started to get calls from the USA. Yes. And we had a song called I've Been Thinking About You, which everybody will probably remember. A bunch of these things.
It was such a massive hit in Germany. Unbelievable.
I know. I think it was one of the most played records ever in Germany. Of all time, which is somewhere one of these awards is some German thing that says, congratulations, you were played more than anyone else ever in the world. It was great. My German isn't very good, so I hope that's what it says.
Fantastic.
And then what happened was Thinking About You got to number 1 in Germany, in Canada, many other territories. I think it was number 1 single in 1990 in 13 or 14 countries, and it had still not been released in the USA. And that's when
That's not too
MCA
bad.
Records.
Yeah.
MCA Records called us up and they said, "Hey, do you guys want to jump on a plane and maybe Concorde and we'll fly you to New York?" And we met a guy called Al Teller, who was the CEO of MCA Records. And we walked in. I had an acoustic guitar, and there was me and the three singers. We walked into his office, and the 50th floor, this huge office, and we sat down, didn't say a thing. We'd already planned what we were going to do, and the guy sat on his desk, and we pushed all the papers off his desk, and we sang, "I've been thinking about you, MCA Records, chapow pow," and he said, "I'm going to make your dreams come true, boys. You got a #1 record," and we're like, "What's the number on the check?" And it was a huge number at the time. And
obviously,
we were like,
yes.
So we signed to MCA worldwide.
Yeah.
And then that led us in a very interesting place where we had 2 major deals. BMG out of the UK, everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And then MCA here in the States, where I'm at now. The first album here in the States was actually a compilation of mostly the second album and a couple of tracks from the first album.
You were a young guy, and I've seen some pictures from your studio from '84. You were really going in there at the perfect time, right?
Before I was in the band, I was working mostly for CBS Records, although I did quite a bit for Island and EMI, a lot of other labels, as a house record producer. So by house, I mean an in-house producer.
Okay.
So I was producing a lot of the younger bands for the labels, mostly out of London, but then I moved to New York and started working out of the New York studios. London Beat was 88 onwards, and then this was 84 to 7.
Okay.
So I was a very early electronic dance music pioneer. I didn't know that's what it was at the time.
Yeah.
And I had a Jupiter 8, which cost me like, I don't know, back then it was like, I want to say $4,000 or something. I had a Prophet 5.
Yeah.
Again, that was like $5,000. I had eventually a Juno 106 and a 303.
Beautiful.
And I used to use Notator, which was an eMagic program, which turned, of course, into Logic Pro eventually.
Yes.
And about the same time, I got to know Chris Adam and Gerhard Lenglin.
Yes.
Well, now these are the guys that created Logic, which used to be called Creator, and it was for an Atari 1040 computer. You probably did that yourself, right?
Yeah, I was on the Atari for a couple of years, yes.
Right. And the timing was kind of odd a little bit. Sometimes if you had too much stuff happening in the MIDI sequencer, everything would go a little bit late.
You were very early in on the Atari.
Yes, and Charlie Steinberg I got to know and became friends with as well. Later on, we'll talk about Rocket Network in a minute. So I used to use Steinberg Pro 24, but we used to use Notator better because it was the first app that actually would spit out reasonably accurate notation.
Yes.
Right, you could actually see the notes in the scale. And because I had a classical background, it helped me to see a bass line actually as notes. I have a friend in London whose name is Martin Phillips, and he ultimately became the producer of I've Been Thinking About You. And we both had a sort of an obsession with timing and tuning. And he worked with Erasure, Vince Clarke. And Erasure, when they were cutting back in the day, they used to have an oscilloscope on the desk between the speakers, and a tool called a Russian Dragon, if anybody's old enough to remember a Russian Dragon. And the Russian Dragon used to tell you whether a part was rushing or dragging. And the Erasure records were down to the oscilloscope going, here's the snare drum. We discovered what we'd do is we'd write the hits. These were dance, dance music back in the 80s. We'd write all the parts with a bunch of MIDI things, maybe playing a Jupiter 8, a Prophet 5, a TB303, maybe an 808, which would have been MIDI connected. And there was something called FSK, which was this odd way of putting a code down on tape. But even when we had it, what we discovered we had to do was to put the sequencer, mute all of the tracks once we got it in feeling right, and then go from the top and cut that part in solo to tape. I was never convinced of this, and Martin Phillips was the guy that had me go, let's just get this in the Russian Dragon with the oscilloscope. And then what we would do at the end of the day, it used to take forever. You'd take every single part and stripe it out on a 24 track. But then you'd play that back, and then you'd play back the sequencer, and the sequencer would be like weird, and then the parts on the track. So the hits we did were all done on analog tape, yes.
So you would mess around in your home studio, build it on your sequencer, and then eventually go to a studio and then put every little thing on the 24-track machine.
Absolutely everything. And it also did this other thing that it forced you to make a decision.
Yeah.
You're like, that's the bass line, that's the hi-hat part. And you could change it, but it involved going, oh, wait a minute, I got to go back in, I got to get the thing, and I haven't got the sampler. We used an Akai S3000.
That's definitely one thing we have in common, that we both still started around this age. Would you say that today, that you had been there during this time, or would you say playing field leveled, or maybe...
If you think about just talking very contemporary-wise now, I use an Apollo system. I've got a couple of them for my audio interface.
Yeah.
It's a company that used to make very famous hardware devices back in the 60s and 70s, something called an 1176, LA2A, and so on. These are very familiar bits of gear. So you can now get a plugin that is an LA2A, and not only a LA2A, but one of the best sounding LA2As. Yeah. Because I've owned a bunch of studio gear. I've been blessed enough to have had a couple of $1 million worth of recording studio at certain stages. I know what they sound like. I know what they do. And the crazy thing is, the plugins do exactly the same thing. It's very, very close. I've never actually sat with a real LA2A and a simulated LA2A, but it is so close that it doesn't matter. And it does really weird, subtle things, like the real one used to, that as you turn the gain up, the distortion starts happening. And then even if you put a flat signal through it, which is not technically doing anything, the meter's not moving, it's still adding color to the sound. And the plugin does the same thing. So if I didn't know through sitting for hours with a real LA2A, by the way, if you just put the bass through one LA2A, don't do anything on it, now get a patch cord and play that into a DBX 160, which was the biggest secret in the world, a DBX 160 limiter. They were inexpensive back then. They were like, I don't know, $200.
Yeah, they're still pretty inexpensive. You can still get them on eBay. They're fun, definitely.
They're fantastic. It makes everything go like this. It's great.
the R-Vox of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to go in an LA2 flat and then into a 160 because it made everything go like this, and then stick it to tape, but it's only because I have the background about having played that I understand that. So if I was new today and I can see all of these options, especially in the UAD world, there's like 200 things. How would I know? Dude, no, you want the LA2A and the 160. So that's the answer to your question. They're just ideas now. It's a visual and some digital processing. And I've been in studio sessions quite recently, actually, where I'm watching someone do stuff. I'm like, hey, do you mind me just saying, try that and that? And all of a sudden, the vocal is like, oh.
You associate a certain color with a certain piece of gear. Then you have the plugin, and you can just do the same thing there.
There's something else, though, Mark, and that is, we used to find it was expensive, a tube mic. I had a Neumann U67 for many years. Back then, I think I paid £15,000, which was close to $30,000 for this tube mic. It's a 50s tube mic. And it was very unreliable. I used to have to get it fixed all the time because the capsule used to get jammed. And we had that, and I had several LA2As, but one of them sounded best. And then, so I had a chain. I used to go, this is my vocal chain, especially for a male R&B voice. And I never changed it because it worked. And it just always worked. But now you've got virtual versions, you can start messing with things and you're always trying to change. And as a result, there are so many options that are so easy to do. I find myself sometimes losing myself in maybe this sounds better. I almost want to
pitch you my book. But of course, you already bought it, right?
I already bought your book. I want to tell you, people watching this, listen. So I had a long, long history in analog mixing, making records, 20 years ago. And then I took a 10-year period doing high-tech. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute, because that is actually where I met Mark for the first time, through a company called Rocket Network. But I've recently got back into recording songs and writing again in a serious way after a hiatus of maybe totally of 15 years. So I wanted to try and learn about what's the best way to use this newfangled gear, doors and stuff. Put me in front of that desk behind you, join. I could sit right there right now, Mark. If you have a 24 track, I will nail the session in that thing. But now when it comes to the DAW, there's gain structure, there's very complex stuff. So I bought this book, and I presume you perfectly targeted me through your Facebook advertising. Maybe that's what it was.
You bought it this summer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you bought it through a cross thing I did with Sonarworks. Could that be the case?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of their Sonarworks. Let's give them a plug. So this is a best headphone you can come across, in my humble opinion. It's a Sennheiser 650, HD 650, and Sonarworks do a plug-in that tunes what you're hearing to compensate for the frequency response of this. So you're hearing a pretty flat response.
My audience is very familiar with it. It's the sort of technology that's really disrupting, because if you don't buy this technology, you spend more money. A lot of $100 headphones like an AKG 240, if it's calibrated with Sonarworks, it beats anything that you pay $1,000 or $2,000 for. And that's crazy because it puts great sound into more people's hands.
Right.
I love that.
I mean, for anybody watching, let me explain a little bit here that if you're in a room, I'm in a very live room right now in my office studio, and there's a lot of reverb and a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And you think that you can calibrate your speakers so that when you sit in the right place, it's adding bass if you're not hearing bass and changing the treble. But it only works if you stay in exactly the same position the whole time. This is the speaker software calibration of speakers.
Yeah.
But because this is a known amount and it's stuck right on your hearing, it's possible to be pretty effective. There's another company. Do you know about these guys? Related to this is a company called Even. I have nothing to do with this company, by the way. There's just some tech.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So Even are a headphone. It's called an earprint. It's really brilliant. And the Even earprint, these just aren't plugged in. They're just a pair of stereo headphones. And they have a way that you can calibrate the hearing to your own hearing. Here's the thing. They're a company from Israel, actually, but they sell these here in the States. And what you do is when you start listening with them, you can calibrate these, and it's like an earprint. It's like having eyeglasses. Again, calibrate for the hearing that you're missing. And it does 8 beeps on each side. It goes, can you hear this? Can you hear this? Can you hear this?
Okay.
And when it gets to 16K, it goes, can you hear this? I'm like, nope. I can't hear anything. What? And then what it does is it then stores that as obviously as some kind of calibration. Then you listen to your own.
This is another factor in the formula, right?
Yes. So my goal is to get Sonarworks to do one for these things. And this is quite dramatic because what it does is it then compensates for your hearing loss.
Yeah, I'll connect you with the guys.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Big time record producer, did it all, $1 million checks and all that. And then you went into something that's completely nuts. And you, right?
Don't even start. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
How did this come about? This would be my first question.
Well, I'm just going to pull this out from behind the wall here.
Yeah.
So here's a thing for that. Can you see this? Whoops. This was called Res Rocket.
Yeah.
We won the Pre-Ars Electronica in '99. Basically, I was the founder of a thing called Rocket Network.
Yeah.
And Rocket Network was technology that did track-based collaboration for audio production.
It's actually the collaboration feature that's in Pro Tools 12.
Cloud collaboration.
In 2017, but we are talking about 1999. So here's a guy with a real vision back then, right?
Along with 3 other guys, Matt Moller, Canton Becker, and Tim Brann, who, by the way, was the co-founder of that. Tim is a very successful producer these days. He did London Grammar. He's based out of the UK. He's done wonderful things since then. But the 4 of us, we invented track-based audio collaboration, which is literally Pro Tools Cloud Collaboration
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
I use it. I'm like, this is so great. We got 5 patents on this. And there's another funny thing. The lead engineer of that project, he's a British guy called Graham Lias. And he has worked with me now for 20 years from then on. And he is the chief engineer on my current startup, which we'll probably talk about at the end, called Focus at Will. he's there's a little thread winning its way through all this. And how did you and I meet?
I found out about Rocket Network in 1999, I guess, probably. And I was always very early guy in all things technology. And you guys had a business model where you would partner up with people who would then rent out virtual studios to people who would collaborate. And I said, you know, if anything, that gives me, and that's a Gary Vaynerchuk favorite term, that gives me a hell lot of attention to show this around. And also you had a chat thing going on in your virtual online recording studios. Mind you, this is 1999, right?
I know.
So audio.
No one knew what we were talking about.
Yeah, but you guys were. It was working like a charm. You know, audio would be compressed in the background, sent over to the other person, and magically pop up there, and you could really be in a session with some other guy in New York. You know, and then so I met some people through the chat, which then. And I want to cut the story short because you're my guest.
But my people don't know about you, so tell my people who are watching this.
Well, in the chat I met a professor from NYU, Brani Sivkovic, and we were talking, becoming friends online as everybody does today, and. And he said, well, you're doing a lot of interesting stuff. You need to meet my son, who's currently doing an internship at p.diddy's Bad Boy. And we connected, and he was working for a guy by the name of John Eaton, who was an A&R guy with Puffy. And like a couple weeks later, the guys flew over to meet me in Germany. And we became friends, and I was showing them the system. And I think Puffy's A&R guy was thinking, well, this is definitely something, you know, in the field of collaboration, because Puffy very early on had this concept. At any time he would have 10 studios in New York who would work on a piece of music with him. And he would, you know, have certain hook line writers he would send from one studio to the next. So Puffy's music production thing was all about collaboration. So it was very natural for these guys to say, well, here's something going on. And I remember very vividly what we were talking about. And John said, well, I can really imagine there would be one guy who would be like your snare doctor or something, you know, and you would go to him. And literally, this is what's happening everywhere these days. In my stem mastering, we get a lot of projects delivered in post-production stem format. And there's definitely an infrastructure out there, you know, where a producer can go to a certain guy who's the best guy for kick drums in the world, and you would deliver him some post-production stem kind of thing, and he would make sure the kick drum is properly tuned to the key of the song. And digital collaboration is very alive. Tell me the story of Rocket Network. How did it continue? And it didn't end up. It ended up in Pro Tools 12 collaboration feature, but there was something in between, right?
There was, yeah. We started in 1994 and had this idea of wanting to collaborate digitally with other people.
In the cloud, you know, right?
Using current terminology in the cloud, And there's a very brilliant guy who was one of the co-founders. His name is Matt Moller, who's a very dear friend of mine these days. And Matt Moller was a student at Northwest University. And there was 4 of us started the Rocket Network system. I was the founder and the CEO, but there was 4 of us doing it. It wasn't me on my own. And Matt Moller and I were the main drivers of a lot of the technology. We're all interested in dance music. Tim Brown was a music producer, and he produced one of the London Beat #1 singles, a song called Come Back. So Tim and I had a sort of a technical dance background.
Yeah.
We'd had the hit in 94, I think. Yeah, the same year, actually. And then I'd set up this trying to build a collaboration. Remember, there was no internet, really. There'd only just been a browser, and it was incredibly early days. None of us knew.
Average people wouldn't have internet at the time, right?
People would say, hey, could you give me a call on my internet number? I'd be like, no, it's called an email address. And the reason was that AOL was a number. Here's my number. It's 126, comma, 7. I'd be like, oh my God. Oh, with dial-up.
Yeah.
And what happened was with Matt Moller and Canton Becker, Tim and I built a working prototype by hacking together bits of code, mostly on a Mac system using or whatever we had available at the time. Canton did the server end, and then Matt did the client end. One night in 1994, late 94, I was in my studio, which looks a little like your studio in the background, in London, in West London, and we had a dial-up connection, I think, and Matt had built the first version of this thing called Dragon, which is standards for a distributed real-time groove network. He built this thing, and we were trying to hack this thing together. It got later and later and later for us. It was getting late for them. They were in Chicago, and it was getting late, so it was like 5 a.m. for us. And we had the big monitors in my room turned up all the way because we couldn't hear anything. And then I remember all of a sudden, Matt goes, I think I fixed it. We were on the phone with him, and he said, I'm sending you a bass line. And all of a sudden, we had this Chicago house bass line just appear. So loud! We were like, oh my God, that is so loud. It shocked the crap out of us. We were like, oh my God. And then a bass drum appeared like this. Yeah. And then they said, why don't you add a keyboard to it? And it was a collaboration system on a loop. It was an 8-bar loop. So I then ran to the machine, and there's a piano, and I'm like, it's probably Tim that played the first part, played a piano part. I'm like, come on, get out of the way, I want to play something too. And then we were shipping parts around in a loop collaboration system, and that was me going, whoa,
holy shit.
Changes. This changes everything. That just came from Chicago live.
Yeah.
And then it turned into Res Rocket Surfer, which was the idea of a virtual band, and then just winding quickly through 2 or 3 years of just insanity. I put a lot of my own money in. We got the guys from Genesis put money in. That we kept on going. I then met Dave Stewart, who was from the Eurythmics. He introduced me to Paul Allen, who's the Microsoft co-founder. And Paul,
he had serious money.
Oh yeah, he had serious money. Paul gave us a couple of $1 million initially on a handshake. It was amazing. Did you attend
one of his famous parties?
I've been to Paul Allen's parties.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I tell you a crazy Paul Allen story that very few people will understand. Paul's known as a tech guy, right? Because he was the co-founder of Microsoft, and he actually built the Microsoft kernel. He's the guy that wrote the original 16K kernel, which was the entire Microsoft operating system. Yeah. And if anybody reads code, which I do now, it is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It is exquisitely beautiful code. I mean, it's like the Mona Lisa of code, this thing. It is incredible code. This is the thing that drove the whole Microsoft command line, everything from. Yeah. And when I was introduced to him, his team said to me, you've got to be very careful with Paul. Don't hug him. Don't look at him directly. All these kind of really ridiculous things because the guy's a billionaire, right? Yeah. But Dave Stewart told me that Paul is a really good guitar player and loves Hendrix. So I'd been on tour forever, and I'd got my playing chops up, and I'd made sure that the place we were meeting in Seattle at Paul's office, there were 2 Strats, 2 vintage Strats, and 2 Marshall Stacks, JTM 45s they were, which are it's the classic Hendrix sound. And I made sure that when I went to the meeting, there was like all of these suits, all of the venture capital people from Vulcan Ventures, which is his team, and then me. So I've been on the road. I was in '94. We just had some hits in London, but I could give a shit what this guy has done. Yeah. And then I'm playing one of the Strats. Of course, is a left-handed Strat upside down, if I remember rightly, because Hendrix used to play a right-handed Strat upside down, right? And I played the regular Strat. And I heard Paul coming, and I started playing "The Wind Cries Mary" or I don't know, some classic. I got my chops down. I was playing. Paul walked straight in, picked up the Strat, and we jammed for like 15 minutes before we said anything. And his guys were sitting like this in the room, you know.
Yeah.
But what it did, and then when I finished, I said, "Hey, Paul, nice to meet you," and I hugged him.
Yeah.
I went, "You're a badass. You can really play, dude." And he goes, "Yeah." I went, "No, you're a real badass. You can't lie. If you can play, you can play." And Paul can really play. He's really, really talented player, like Jeff Beck. So he's got his own style. And so we developed a connection as musicians. And then I showed him the technology, and I said, "Paul, I kind of run out of money, and I've done everything I've done everything I can to get this to here. Will you help?" And he said, "This needs to happen." And he then went on to be our major investors, and he put a total of $18 million in. Eventually, we got the core technology integrated into Logic, Logic Audio, eMagic, Cubase.
Yeah.
We talked to the other DAW manufacturers and Pro Tools. And then in 2003, just winding forward through a whole bunch of moved the company to San Francisco. We were there during the .com, .gone. We sold the company to DigiDesign, Pro Tools.
Yeah.
And it turned into something called DigiDelivery.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people used for many, many years in the film business.
Definitely.
Right. And then I worked at Avid for 18 months to help integrate the core Rocket technology into the Avid, the Media Composer and Pro Tools. And it taught me a lot about, I was working with the best software team in the world in audio. These guys, Dave Smith, who's the inventor of the Prophet.
Yes.
Yeah, he was on the same floor. I got to know him personally. And then the deep level audio engineers, there's a guy called Dave Conry, who was the CTO, Avid CTO. And I got to know him very well. And he was the guy that actually wrote the DAE, which is the DigiDesign audio engine.
Remember it very well.
Right? Getting to meet Dave Conry, for instance, and just learning at a low level what you need to do to make audio code reliable, what you need to, and then it was an amazing lesson in software development, and because I had no formal background at all in software development, but working for Avid for the 2 years we worked with them before they bought the company, and then the 2 years afterwards for me was like college. That was like me going, okay, got it.
Yeah.
And understanding about latency and priority and how do you manage interruption. There's all this deep level
they
stuff.
pretty much brought this to the computers, right? I mean, there was stuff like the Synclavier, the Fairlight, there were samplers, but they were the first ones. This is why they're still...
They were the first.
That's why they're the Mercedes of DAWs.
Yeah, interestingly, Pro Tools always used to sound better. Just like with the listening test, you'd run a session on, say, Logic or Digital Performer or Cubase or any of the different DAWs. Then you'd run the same audio in Pro Tools, and it always sounded better. And I always thought it was because you're using their devices, using a 192 I/O or using one of their hardware devices. But just in the last couple of months, I've started listening again, just with the internal, running Pro Tools 12 or Logic 10 or whatever it is, and then using the Apollo as an output. Pro Tools still sounds better, in my humble opinion. It actually sounds more musical, and there's something about it which is more pleasing.
There are different audio engines in different programs, different bit depth and different stuff you can do before it distorts.
Guess what? It's math. Again, for people watching this, how it works is, here's an audio signal, it's math, it's a whole bunch of numbers, and here's another audio signal, it's a whole bunch of math and it's numbers. Yeah. When you sum them, you're literally joining them up, more complex than this. Yeah. But the math that is used to sum the audio is the magic. The key is in the algorithm. And so if you've got 48 channels of audio, there's a lot of complex math all happening at the same time, and there's floating point and a bunch of other things. Yeah. So, they sound different because the math is different, very different.
And then, of course, what I'm doing here is I have all options, to sum it digitally, to put it through an older SSL, to put it through, I have the newer as well, the X-Track, Super Analog, 9K. Right. And then there is certain things you want to do with one desk, and there's stuff you want to do digitally.
Mm-hmm.
It has a has a vibe.
But then there's always this cost of doing business in a certain way. So if you're going out through an analog system, it's the pain in the ass. Whereas if it's a Pro Tools session, you just go, I want to turn the vocal up, bang, and then turn it down. So Steve Lipsum is an old friend of mine. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I know who he is, yes.
He's a very funny guy. If anybody knows him, you will second this. He's hilarious. He always was, and he still is. And I said to him recently, hey, Steve, are you still doing summing? Are you still doing that, taking everything out from, on a track by track, putting it into something like, he used to say it was the most expensive, stupid thing in the world, which was like his SSL. He'd have 48 channels at 0 with his Pro Tools session going through that. And then he goes, there's your mix, son, because everything was being done in Pro Tools. And he said to me recently, he doesn't do that. He uses a couple of I think they're S3s, is that what they called? The Pro Tools hardware unit. And he doesn't do anything outside of the box now. And I said, why? He goes, it's a pain in the ass, mate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So the pain in the ass factor is more than the hit that you get on the analog summing.
And this is something we could go on and discuss on Gear Sluts for the next 200 years. But what I find more interesting is now that we're at your second career, right?
Yes.
And there's a third one.
There is a third one, yeah. There's actually a fourth one.
I was going to ask, does it ever end?
Yeah.
No. You have a life goal, like Gary Vaynerchuk wants to buy the New York Jets. And do you have a plan? Or is it just...
Well, the most important thing, if you look back on your life, I'm in my 50s, right? So you look back on your life and you go, in the last 30 years, what was the defining moment? Well, writing my first number one song in America was a major defining moment. I mean,
definitely.
Wow.
Yes.
It changes everything, and you're always able to say, yep, I've written number one songs in America. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
But about, when would it have been? 2010, I was invited to be part of something called Singularity University. And SU, Singularity University, is it's an educational institution in California, mostly funded by Google, and su.org, sgu.org.
Is it an actual part of Google? So it? No,
it's not. And what it is it's a university which is focused on exponential growth, technical and human exponential growth. And I'll explain what that means. If you think in a linear way, you could think about 30 steps from where you're sitting right now. You would be maybe out in the hallway, maybe in the kitchen. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So
I would be at the rear wall of my studio. It's that big.
Oh, of course. There you go. It's a huge studio. Well, in your case, not showing off at all. You'd be just at the end of the control room. Most normal people like us have a studio that's this big, and we would be outside in the lots.
You're in LA. Your 1 square meter costs more than my 70 whatever square meter.
Don't even get me started. But if you're talking about non-linear or exponential growth, where each footstep is twice as long. My first footstep is obviously, say, 1 meter, and then my next footstep would be another 2 meters, my next would be another 4 meters. 30 footsteps, if each one is double, gets you actually to Italy from LA, and 32 steps gets you all the way back again, and 33 steps gets you to the moon, and then 34 steps gets you to... And so there is this sort of, if you look at the amount of linear numbers, an exponential curve does this. And when things in our society become data-driven, things rapidly start changing. Yeah. When the cost of doing anything becomes close to zero, you get exponential change happening. And so when I went to Singularity University, they ask you a question. They say, what can you do to positively impact the lives of 1 billion people? And my initial reaction was, whoa. what can I do to positively impact the lives of a billion people? Well, I'll tell you how your mixing book will actually likely do that in a minute.
Can't wait.
So I sat there and someone said to me, how many people have listened to your songs? You know, this lot over their career. And I was like, do you think it's 1 billion people? And I'm like, yeah, it probably is actually.
Yeah.
I think my songs have probably been played 1 billion times. Like this one is 3 million. This one's 3 million times on the radio. How many people will listen to So I was able to go, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I get it. So if you're a writer, you've had some kind of success, your songs have been listened to 1 billion times. So that led me down this whole path about what could we do with music to positively impact people, not just entertain them, but to positively change them. And through conversations with Singularity, I formed a company here in LA called Focus at Will. And Focus at Will makes music that helps people concentrate when they're working. And I started it with a music business guy here, John Fatale, who's got a long history of working with music production and commercial production in particular.
So in other words, let me interpret this. So the challenge that the guys gave you, how can you impact these people? You said, I'm going to make music part of the equation of the productivity of the world, correct?
Yes. What we wanted to do was to create a music service that helps people work smarter, more efficiently, more productive. You waste a lot of time. I want to cycle back quickly to how can your book positively impact the lives of 1 billion people? And the answer is the people who read your book. Mark's book, by the way, is about how to mix music better, how to make much more high quality mix. And Mark, I've taken your advice on a few things. There's a bit of a mess down here, but can you see what I've got right there?
Yes. Well done. Well done.
I have a little radio system. Mark's a big fan of not listening to your mix on big speakers like this.
Yes.
But listening to music on little speakers. So your book is all about helping people make much better mixes. And so I suspect that a few thousand super great producers will read your book and as a result will positively impact. Right. And so I suspect you have already positively impacted the lives of way more than 1 billion plays. And as your book goes on and you get more successful, you're likely to do it over and over again. So congratulations. You're already doing something exponentially.
I'm going to tell my wife.
Secondhand, you. Just a little more about Focus at Will. If you're interested, it's focusatwill.com. And it's a music service that plays instrumental music for people when they're working. So it's the complete opposite of this and what you do most of the time.
This service is not for people who produce music because they're not listening to music while...
It's not, and the music is not for people who are listening to music for entertainment.
I was diving into this a little bit, and you had done some very interesting interviews, and I guess where a lot of your hit songwriter knowledge came in was that what you wanted for this music streaming service was you wanted the exact opposite of what a hit record is, that takes your attention away from what you're doing and makes you sing. Like when we had a chat on the phone a couple days ago, I was singing, I've been thinking about you all day long for a week.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So we discovered, this is really the essence of the work that I'm doing in Focus at Will, is that humans, all humans, have two parts of their brain. Yeah. There's my internal, my endogenous, technically, attention, which is me talking to you, looking at my phone. I can see you like you're this big on my phone. And I'm concentrating on the words that you're saying. I'm looking at you like this. I'm going, hey, Mark, and da-da-da. So that is my attention. And I'm mostly using my hands. And I'm using my eyes, and I'm talking. Yeah. While I'm talking to you, something else, which is an other part of my brain, which is my non-conscious mind, it's called my exogenous or my external attention, is using my hearing, and it is looking behind me. Mm-hmm. So how well I can concentrate on what you're saying and our conversation is directly driven to how safe physically I am here. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm in my studio at the moment, and the door's locked. So I am safe, and there's no one behind me. There's someone sitting on my left, but I'm able to concentrate because my limbic system, which is the part of my brain, my reptile brain, knows what's happening. Yeah. But if I hear a scream outside, a human scream, or a human voice at my door, I am going to pay attention to that, because is it danger or reward? Is it someone bringing me a sandwich? Or is it someone out to hurt me? Or there's actually three things, which is food, sex, and danger. So is it a sandwich? Is it someone going to hurt me? Or is it the other thing? And all of us have this response. So we discovered that when someone is working, the scenario for Focus at Will is not people who work in the music business, and it's not probably many other people listening to this. But for regular folk who have a job, if you have to block out the sounds of all the people around you, what you're going to do is you're going to reach for the headphones. If you listen to any music that's designed to engage you, that's anything that Mark's ever produced, anything that I've ever produced, Eminem, anything, it doesn't matter what it is, it's designed to engage you. So what you've done is you've replaced, you've blocked out the sounds around you, and now you've added a new problem. You're listening to Snoop Dogg, who we have found is one of the most distracting artists of all time, because he's so great, you can't ignore him. Try doing anything and putting Snoop. You are going to be typing at some point in your typing. You're going to check, because you probably wrote "drop it like it's hot" during the thing. You can't help it. So we discovered that there is a very specific type of music which will help you focus. And it's music for your non-conscious mind. It's music for this part of your brain, not your conscious brain. Yeah. And it's different for everybody. There's a lot of science around it. And what works for one person doesn't work for someone else.
I think I heard you saying it has a little part of a start of a hook, so it keeps you it keeps your the back of your mind kind of at it, right?
It has to have enough interest that your non-conscious mind doesn't tune it out. But it can't have too much interest. And so in Focus at Will, we have a very experienced music group run by my co-founder, John Vitale. And his group, what they do is they remix, remaster, re-edit all of the music. There's no vocals at all. But more importantly and fascinatingly, there's no music that sounds like a vocal. No cellos. There's no trombones, no trumpets, because this part of your brain will still notice those things. Jazz is very distracting because it's got a lot of, you know.
But then at the same time, it's not one music fits everybody. You have to go through an actual test before the streaming site gives you recommendations what would work best for you, right?
There's an onboarding quiz on the system that's based on very solid science, and it's based on your personality type. And it's to do with how introverted you are and how easily distracted you are.
Is it DISC?
It's very similar, It's very similar to DISC. It's actually something called the Big Five. It's a hybrid of DISC and Big Five.
Okay.
These are psychological profiling systems. And there's the simple takeaway, just to wrap this up, is that the more easily distracted somebody is, if you have a friend that's like really hyper all the time and just like, we're gonna do this, you think intuitively you want to give them something calming. Hey,
I would, yes.
Right? No, it's the opposite. The more easily distracted you are, the more crazy the audio has to be to calm you down. It's totally counterintuitive. So people with ADD, people with ADHD, we have a lot of, about 5% of our users are diagnosed or self-diagnosed as that. The music that they need to listen to sounds like German gabba techno at 190 to 220 beats per minute. It's nuts. Sounds like
it has to tune in with their like frequency.
It's so crazy.
Great. I also want to say hello to Peter Stone. You greeted him as well. I actually have a meeting with Peter tomorrow, an online meeting.
It's a small world.
Yes, it is.
Peter, hi. I just remember, Peter, I met you because you bought my Jupiter 8 off me. I think that's right. In 1992 or something.
I met him through a guy who has a helicopter in the back of his garden, and we were flying to buy a sandwich with a
That's
helicopter.
ridiculous.
Back to your story and stories. 3 ridiculously successful and influential careers already. You still look young like a baby, full of energy. And what's
Yeah.
next?
Well, I'm really, what we didn't talk about is what you and I have really reconnected on, and that is I'm still a very active songwriter,
Yes.
and I'm working with a number of new up and coming artists, and I'm still signed to a major publisher as a songwriter, and I spend a couple of days a week in the studio.
It's a very challenging time as far as, it would be completely wrong to say there's no business model for musicians, but everything we've learned, like everything you've learned in your first career business-wise, you need to forget about it, right? Or
No, I would say, we sold a lot of records in London Beat, and I never earned barely anything as a performer.
Yeah.
So my performance royalties as a member of the band London Beat from both MCA and RCA Records were negligible. barely negligible. And we had, a lot of success at the time. So the only money we made was doing live shows, merchandise, and writing.
Publishing, yes.
Luckily, we wrote our own material, and I was the major writer on the hits.
Yeah.
So, that old business has gone away now, but there are many, many new opportunities that were not there before.
Yeah.
You have access, and if you're good and you have a little bit of savvy about social media, and there are opportunities that were never there when we were starting. In a really positive way. One door is closed, which is being signed to a major label, which I was lucky enough to do at the time. But it doesn't really matter because you can build your own network and you can build your own following and monetize it yourself. But it means that you have to have a business savvy, and so you need to have a business partner if you're not able, and it's impossible for one person to do all of the above.
Yeah.
So I'm actually kind of positive. I've met some really talented younger musicians who have a really interesting angle and a very different outlook on what it is to be a musician and how to be successful. And I think we're still in the early days, to be honest with you. Someone who I'd give an amazing shout out to is called Shalita Burke. I don't know if you've come across her yet.
Nope. Tell me about her.
Shalita Burke. She is a LA-based singer. She'd had a song out recently called Penetration, which is a fantastic, very interesting. I didn't co-write that, but I'm writing with her. And there's a producer who's a close friend of mine who I work with here a lot called Marcus Bell. And Marcus I almost describe him as an old school producer like you and me. He is, but he's also very, very switched on Bell Ringer Productions. Very switched on to the opportunities and how things change in this new world. And Shalita, in so many ways, defines, she is an her day job for a while was she worked at Microsoft as a growth hacker. So she's a very technical engineer as well as being an incredibly talented singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
And so she's just got her second single has just hit 1 million plays on Spotify as an independent artist. Her first single, Penetrate, was also that. And so I think that if you understand virality and if you understand how people like to share things and what people are looking for, there is a real opportunity. I'm also really interested in branding and how back in the day, Phil Collins was sponsored by VW, right?
Yeah,
and people are like, whatever, I can't get no satisfaction. And now they're being sponsored by American Express. I mean, come on. But there are new versions of that are much more aligned. So I think there are opportunities for new young artists coming through to find a brand, an upcoming brand not necessarily a car manufacturer, but say a coffee brand, or a lifestyle brand, a candle brand, or a clothing line, or something that really fits and aligns well, and to become the spokesperson or the owner of that.
You have to build a following somehow. Of course, then you have to really dig into social media. I mean, I would say the main principle is that where there's something new happening, you have to go in very quickly, because the big companies take a long time until they find out about it. And I mean, just adding some value to this for our viewers. You know, I'm currently in certain territories able to reach 1 million people with $20 on Instagram stories. And then podcast, of course, is a big thing. This is one reason why I'm really pushing it, because, you know, if a show like the one today can bring people to push a subscribe button on their phone, and I have a little home on their phone, you know, and I can bring more stuff to them every week. I think that's a perfect thing. And I've been listening to podcasts on my commute in the last 12 years, audiobooks as well. And I've heard that more young people listen to podcasts than to music on their way to work, because they want to educate themselves, entertain them with something, entertain and educate at the same time. And your streaming company does something really, really unique. Everybody I told about this were like, I need to check this out. It's a great thing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. It's, you know, you asked me what's my sort of life goal next, and it's to help people do stuff better and not waste your time. I'm not interested in building widgets for video games so you can kill more people, or you know, just waste your time with just some stupid game. I'm interested in helping people have a better quality of life. You know, how do you have kids, right, yourself?
Yes, 3. My oldest daughter is studying medicine already. She's 20.
Right.
The little one is 10. It's a lot of fun having kids.
Yeah, me too. And what we end up doing, particularly here in California, working in high tech, is you end up being wound into this thing. You're on a team and you're doing this thing, and you're working weekends and you're working late. While that's happening, your kids are growing up, right? While that's happening, your dog's getting older. Dogs are only with us for a limited time.
Yeah.
Remember that. You know, you've got how many years with your dog? And so I've become very focused on creating smarter, more efficient working habits, so you don't burn out, so you can go home and have this quality time. Even if you don't have kids or a dog, you still need quality time with your friends or just on your own. Yeah. You need to recharge and just kind of have a balance in life. And that's really what we're focused on in this company, Focus at Will. And that's really where I'm going more and more.
I think that's a great end point.
Absolutely.
Will Henshall, the man that had 3 fantastic careers already, was a pleasure to talk to you. How did the bass session go?
The song that we were working on together. Yeah. Still working. Jonathan, who is playing bass on one of my songs at the moment, was actually he just joined us. Hi, Jonathan, how's the bass coming out?
Fantastic. Now I know an awesome bass player. That's always useful.
Oh my God, he's the best, mate. He's fantastic.
My assistant has set up the session, and probably tomorrow I'm working on the other song, put it all over the SSL, because in front of the SSL, not even looking at the screen, I always find the exact right spot where I want to have it. Within minutes. I much rather have the option, and it looks so much better than the computer on the table.
I know. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to reconnect.
Well, let me end this with recommending the podcast. A lot of my German followers know that I've done a podcast called the Studio Frühstück, the Studio Breakfast, which went on to go #1 on the Apple Podcast app. I'm rebranding the English podcast. This was the first one with Will Henshall.
Great.
Very entertaining, and it was really good to reconnect. And of course, there's more to come. All right.
Always more to come. Thank you.
See you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Big time record producer.
The difference is, what's your foundation?
How difficult it has been to lose Prince.
Good morning, Mark Mozart.
This is the VCA section. Output, output, output.